You feel your body getting weaker and think it's just age? That there's no way to change it? I understand that fear, and it's one of the most painful ones that exist. Losing strength, autonomy, depending on someone to get up from a chair. But I need to tell you something important. This is a lie that science has already debunked. There is a simple solution right inside your own refrigerator. I'm Dr. Kevin Vries, and I'm going to show you exactly how to reverse this. The lie of inevitable weakness. There's something I hear almost every day in my practice that honestly bothers me a great deal. The person comes in, says they're losing strength in their legs, that climbing stairs has become difficult, that their body feels heavier than before, and then they finish the sentence with that typical resignation. But it's just age, right, doctor? And I understand where that comes from. This idea is so deeply rooted that it has become almost an axiom, a truth that no one questions. Except it's wrong, profoundly wrong. Science has advanced enough for us to dismantle this myth with solid evidence. What we call sarcopenia, this progressive loss of muscle mass that happens over the years, is not an immutable biological destiny. It's not like gray hair or wrinkles. It's a process that can be drastically slowed, and in many cases even reversed, when a person receives the right information and acts at the right time. I treat patients over 70 who have more muscular vitality than people 20 years younger. This is not privileged genetics. It is the result of specific choices based on what the body truly needs at this stage of life. And here comes a detail that almost no one notices. Much of what the muscle needs to stay strong already exists in simple, everyday foods that are probably inside your refrigerator right now. The problem is not a lack of resources, it's a lack of correct information. Many people reduce their food intake as they age, thinking the body needs less. But the muscle, on the contrary, needs more nutritional attention, not less. When that attention doesn't come, the body begins to use its own muscle tissue as an energy source. It's a slow, silent process that slowly takes your strength away without warning. And the weakness that seems small today becomes the big problem of tomorrow. It becomes a fall, it becomes dependence, it becomes a loss of autonomy. None of these consequences are inevitable, but they all become much more likely when a person believes that weakening is too natural to be fought. Sarcopenia, the silent enemy. In their early 50s, many people start to notice that they climb stairs with more difficulty, carry grocery bags less easily, tire more quickly. And almost always the explanation the person gives themselves is the vaguest possible. I'm getting old. But there is a specific process behind this, with a name, a mechanism, and consequences that go far beyond fatigue. This process is called sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is the progressive loss of muscle mass, strength, and physical function. The World Health Organization only officially recognized it in 2016, which means that for decades, countless people lost strength and autonomy without even knowing that an identifiable process was happening to them. It begins silently around age 40 and accelerates significantly after 60, potentially leading to the loss of up to 20% of total muscle mass. I see this in my practice with a frequency that concerns me. The patient comes in saying they're not the same as before, and when we investigate more carefully, we discover that that feeling of weakness has its concrete root in muscle tissue that was being lost year after year, without pain, without warning. Muscle is not just what makes you lift weights. It's what maintains balance, supports the joints, ensures you can rise from a chair without support. When it diminishes, autonomy goes with it. And what makes sarcopenia so dangerous is exactly this silence. Most people only notice the problem when the losses are already limiting, and reversing that condition requires far more effort than preventing it. The 3 devastating consequences. 3 problems, just 3. But each one of them, on its own, would be capable of completely changing your life. When I explain to my patients what sarcopenia really does to the body, most of them fall silent for a few seconds. It's that quiet, almost uncomfortable recognition. The first consequence is what concerns me most in clinical practice, a doubled risk of serious falls. I'm not talking about any ordinary stumble. I'm talking about falls with enough force to fracture the hip. When muscle loses strength and reaction speed, the body loses that automatic protective mechanism that, in youth, would catch you before you even realized you were losing your balance. A hip fracture after age 65 can mean prolonged hospitalization, surgery, lengthy rehabilitation, and in many cases, a permanent loss of mobility that transforms your entire daily routine. Stay with me, because the second consequence is even more insidious: the loss of independence. It doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in gradually, disguised as normal fatigue. First, getting up from a chair starts to require more effort. Then, carrying groceries becomes too heavy. Then, climbing a staircase becomes a conscious decision. I followed a 72-year-old patient, lucid and active, who was surrendering small autonomies without realizing it, until the day she needed help getting dressed. She had no serious illness. She had advanced, untreated sarcopenia. And the third consequence strikes from within, in a way that most people never associate with muscles: the metabolic impact. Muscle is not just for movement. It is a living organ that regulates how the body uses energy. When it weakens, the body loses efficiency in controlling blood sugar, opening the door to type 2 diabetes. Fat begins to accumulate more easily, including around the organs, and the heart begins to operate in an increasingly hostile metabolic environment. 3 different paths, one single route. Anabolic resistance, the defect of aging. There is a silent mechanism acting inside your body that completely changes the way muscle responds to nutrition after age 60. I call it anabolic resistance, and understanding what happens here is essential to avoiding a very common trap: thinking you're doing everything right and yet still losing muscle mass without knowing why. Think of the muscle as a factory. When you were young, that factory received the raw material, protein, and converted it into muscle structure efficiently. A reasonable amount of protein was enough to keep production running well. With aging, that factory becomes less sensitive to the signal. It receives the raw material, but doesn't respond the same way. It needs more quantity, better quality, and more intense stimuli to produce the same result. I see this happening all the time in my practice. Patients who eat what they've always eaten, who maintain a routine that worked for decades, but who continue to weaken progressively, and they can't understand why. The reason is this: their body has changed, but the nutritional strategy has not kept pace with that change. What comes next is a detail that almost no one notices. Simply increasing the amount of protein in any way is not enough. Quality matters greatly, because certain types of protein more powerfully activate the mechanisms of muscle synthesis, even in a body that has already developed this anabolic resistance. Ignoring this is not just a nutritional mistake. It is a silent acceleration of muscle loss that gradually compromises the strength, balance, and independence that make all the difference in everyday life. Cottage cheese, the nighttime guardian of muscles. During the night, your body does not rest. While you sleep, vital processes happen in silence. The immune system reorganizes, the brain consolidates memories, and, if raw materials are available, muscles are repaired and rebuilt. The problem is that this process depends on protein, and most people go to bed in a metabolic fast, with no fuel to sustain this nighttime work. This is where cottage cheese comes in a way that few people imagine. About 80% of its protein is casein, a type of protein with a unique characteristic. When it reaches the stomach, it transforms into a thick gel that digests very slowly. Think of it this way: while other proteins pass quickly through the system, like a fast rain that doesn't soak the soil, casein is like a fine, persistent drizzle that slowly seeps in over hours. This means that the essential amino acids for muscles are released continuously for 6 to 8 hours, exactly during the period when the body is sleeping, and, in theory, receiving no food at all. I have a 67-year-old patient who once asked me why she woke up with muscle aches, even though she hadn't done anything strenuous. Part of the answer lay precisely in this: the prolonged overnight fast was causing her body to seek energy from her own muscles, a process called catabolism. When we introduced cottage cheese as an evening snack, within a few weeks she reported less stiffness upon waking and more energy early in the morning. What no one usually explains is that preserving muscle is not just an aesthetic matter. After the age of 60, it is a matter of autonomy. Muscle is what keeps you upright, what allows you to climb stairs, carry weight, maintain balance, and avoid falls. And cottage cheese, consumed consistently before bed, acts as a silent guardian of that tissue while you rest. Leucine, the key that starts the muscle engine. Imagine the muscle as an engine. You have fuel. You eat protein. You try to eat well. but the engine won't start, not because you ran out of gas, but because you're missing the key. That is exactly what leucine represents inside your body. Leucine is an essential amino acid, which means your body cannot produce it on its own. It must come from food. And its role goes far beyond being just another component of protein. Leucine acts as a direct signal to the muscle, as if it were knocking on the cell's door and saying, "It's time to build." Without that signal, no matter how much protein you consume, the muscle simply doesn't receive the order to regenerate and grow. I see this in my practice all the time. Patients who eat chicken, eggs, and beans think they're doing everything right, and they are, up to a point. But the concentration of leucine in what they consume, and the moment at which they consume it, makes an enormous difference. There is a study that reviewed 16 different research papers involving nearly 1,000 elderly participants, and the result was consistent. Supplementing or increasing leucine intake significantly elevated muscle synthesis in that age group. It was not a marginal improvement. It was a result robust enough to change the way I advise my patients. Cottage cheese enters this conversation because it is one of the dietary sources with a relevant concentration of leucine, especially for those who cannot tolerate large amounts of meat or have digestive difficulties. Follow this reasoning. It's not just any protein that starts the engine. It's protein with enough leucine to cross the activation threshold. Below that threshold, the stimulus is insufficient and the muscle remains on standby. After age 60, that threshold becomes even more demanding. The body becomes less sensitive to the stimulus, which means that the amount of leucine needed to trigger synthesis increases. Ignoring this detail is what causes so many high-protein diets to work well on paper and fail in practice for older individuals. Ricotta, muscle energy for the start of the day. Ricotta is one of the most underestimated foods by those who need it most. The person over 50 who wants to maintain strength, energy, and independence in their daily life. Your body goes the entire night without receiving any nutrients. Hours and hours of fasting. And what happens to the muscle during that time? It begins using its own reserves as an energy source. When you are young, this is not a major problem. But after 50, with sarcopenia already acting in silence, every morning that begins without quality protein leaves the muscle a little more vulnerable than it was the day before. This is exactly where ricotta comes in. It is produced from whey, precisely the fraction richest in fast-absorbing proteins. This means that when you eat ricotta early in the morning, the body can use those nutrients almost immediately to rebuild and nourish muscle tissue. There is no heavy digestion, no long wait. The message reaches the muscle in real time. Ricotta provides up to 13 grams of protein per 100 grams of food, and its soft texture makes all the difference for those who already feel some discomfort when chewing, or for those who simply have no appetite right after waking up. I hear this very frequently in my practice. The good news is that ricotta fits perfectly into this reality. Mixed with a fruit, with a drizzle of olive oil, or with fresh herbs, it transforms breakfast without losing what truly matters. And it doesn't need to stop at breakfast. If you engage in some physical activity, even a longer walk than usual, consuming ricotta shortly afterward helps rebuild the muscle fibers that were recruited during the effort. This recovery process is what, over time, keeps the muscle strong, responsive, and functional for daily tasks. When muscles are well nourished from early in the day, the effect shows up throughout the entire day. Better balance, more support, more energy to do what needs to be done, without that feeling that the body is too heavy. Fresh Minas cheese, the post-exercise ally. Right after a walk, your body enters a special state. A window opens, short, lasting minutes to a few hours, in which the muscle is more receptive than usual to absorbing protein and initiating the rebuilding process. And it is exactly at this moment that what you put on your plate makes an enormous difference, far greater than most people imagine. Fresh Minas cheese plays a role that I consider underestimated in this equation. It contains whey protein, which is a fast-absorbing protein. This means that unlike other protein sources that the body digests more slowly, this protein reaches the muscles in a much shorter time. Think of it this way. If the muscle is waiting for a resource to rebuild itself, it makes sense to deliver that resource while the door is still open, not hours after it has already closed. I see this in my practice frequently. Patients who come back from a short walk, 30 or 40 minutes, and eat no protein immediately afterward. They end up missing a concrete opportunity to preserve muscle mass. There is a woman I have been following for a few years who developed the habit of eating a slice of Minas cheese alongside her post-exercise meal, and it was one of the simplest adjustments that helped her maintain leg strength over time. Research with older men confirms that whey protein, consumed after resistance exercise, measurably increases muscle synthesis. In other words, the muscle manufactures more protein than it would without this support. This matters enormously for those over 60 because at that stage the body no longer responds with the same efficiency to any given stimulus, and every detail counts. What makes fresh Minas cheese even more practical is the ease of consumption. It requires no preparation, no elaborate recipe, and fits into a simple meal after any physical activity, even if that activity was just a walk around the block. The simplicity here is an advantage, not a limitation. Parmesan, the protein bomb in small doses. There are foods we use out of habit without knowing what we're actually putting on our plate. Parmesan is one of those cases. A pinch here, a small spoonful there, and most people think it's just for flavor. But what I see in the nutritional data still surprises me today, after so many years working with functional nutrition. 100 grams of Parmesan contains up to 36 grams of protein. To put that in perspective, consider that chicken breast, which many people consider the gold standard of protein, delivers around 22 grams for the same weight. Parmesan nearly doubles that. And here comes a detail that almost no one notices. It's not just the quantity that matters, but what your body can actually use. The long maturation process of Parmesan does something I often compare to a natural pre-digestion. The proteins are partially broken down during the aging of the cheese, and this greatly facilitates your body's work. The amino acids reach the muscle with less effort, more bioavailable. For those over 60 who already know that the digestive system doesn't work with the same efficiency as before, this difference is real and practical. I treat many patients who come in consuming enough protein on paper, but with compromised absorption. The food goes in, but the body can't use what it needs. Parmesan, through its maturation process, reduces part of that barrier. What comes next may surprise you. Parmesan is also one of the densest sources of calcium that exists in the diet, and I need to make clear something that many people still don't know. Calcium is not just for bones. It is essential for muscle contraction. Without adequate calcium, muscle simply doesn't function well. It becomes slower, weaker, less responsive. This directly affects your stability, your balance, and your protection against falls. A tablespoon of grated Parmesan over any dish already represents a concrete nutritional impact. It doesn't need to be an exaggerated quantity. It needs a consistent presence, with awareness of what that small gesture is doing inside your body. The strategic combination, cottage cheese plus fruit. What makes a difference is not always what seems most elaborate. Sometimes the most powerful combination is also the simplest, and that is exactly the case when we talk about cottage cheese with a piece of fruit before bed. It may seem too obvious to have any real effect, but what happens inside the body when these two foods meet is far more sophisticated than it appears. Stay with me here because this detail completely changes the nighttime outcome. When you eat only the cottage cheese, the casein is already at work. It will release amino acids slowly and continuously throughout the night. That's already good. But there is a subtle problem that few people notice. There is no point in having the building material available if the signal to use that material doesn't arrive along with it. And this is where the fruit plays a strategic role. Fruits like apple, pear, or strawberry have something in common. They don't spike blood sugar aggressively. They are what we call low glycemic index foods, meaning they raise glucose gently and in a controlled way. And that gentle rise is enough to trigger a modest insulin response. Here comes a detail that almost no one notices. In this context, insulin is not the villain. It acts as a key that opens the door of the muscle cells to receive the amino acids that casein is delivering. I see this very clearly in my practice. Patients who use this combination report more energy in the morning, less stiffness upon waking, and over time, a much more consistent maintenance of muscle mass than those who consume cottage cheese alone or opt for a completely different snack. Picture it this way. Casein is the truck carrying the bricks. Insulin is the one who opens the gate to the construction site. Without the bricks, there's no construction. But without the open gate, the bricks are left outside waiting. Both need to arrive together, and this combination ensures exactly that. Resistance exercise, the construction project. Eating well is the beginning, but it's not the end of the story. I had to learn this by watching patients who followed the correct nutrition to the letter and still continued losing strength. What was missing? The signal. The body needs a reason to build, and that reason only comes one way. You need to truly use your muscles. Resistance exercise works as a clear order that the body understands. When you exert a muscle against a load, the body registers that demand and begins to prepare better for the next time. Without that signal, the protein you consume has limited potential. It exists, it circulates, but it doesn't find the right destination. Here comes a detail that almost no one notices. You don't need a gym or expensive equipment to activate this mechanism. Over more than 15 years of treating patients over 60, I identified 3 simple movements, done at home, that are already sufficient to put the body in building mode. The first is sitting down and standing up from a chair without using your hands for support. It seems trivial, but it works the thighs and glutes with impressive efficiency. I have seen patients who could barely do 3 repetitions at first, and within a few weeks, were rising firmly and without fear. The second is standing calf raises. Lift your heels, lower slowly. This movement strengthens a forgotten muscle group that plays a direct role in balance and fall prevention, a risk that grows silently with age. The third is a resistance band row, mimicking the motion of pulling something toward your own body. It works the back, improves posture, and reduces that feeling of heaviness in the shoulders that many people normalize as if it were inevitable. 2 to 3 times a week already produces concrete results. It's not about intensity, it's about consistency and giving the body the right signal at the right time. The practical daily plan. Everything I've explained so far makes more sense when you see how to fit it into a real routine. That ordinary day, full of commitments and distractions. Because knowledge alone doesn't change muscle. What changes it is the repeated habit, day after day, week after week. Over more than 15 years following patients over 50, I've noticed that most people don't fail out of lack of willpower. They fail because no one showed them the path in a concrete way. So let me do that now. In the morning, when you wake up, your body is coming out of a long period without protein. Sleep is necessary, but it is also catabolic, meaning the body consumes muscle during the night if it doesn't have the right support. That's why the first meal matters. A slice of fresh Minas cheese or a portion of ricotta at breakfast already breaks this cycle and signals to the body that material is available to preserve and rebuild. At lunch, if you did any physical activity in the morning, whether a walk, a light weightlifting session, or any more intense movement, this is the moment when the muscle is most receptive. Including a dairy product in this meal, whether natural yogurt, cheese, or whole milk, amplifies everything that the exercise started. In the afternoon, when hunger sets in and energy drops, a simple soup with a little grated Parmesan on top, or a fruit with nuts and cheese, serves 2 purposes at the same time. It sustains energy and keeps the protein intake active. Here comes a detail that almost no one notices: the 2-hour window before bed. I see this in my practice as one of the most wasted moments for those who want to maintain strength with age. Cottage cheese at this time provides a protein that digests slowly and steadily, exactly what the body needs to work during sleep instead of breaking down muscle. It's not a difficult protocol, it's a sequence of simple choices made with intention. What transforms is not the perfection of a single day, but consistency over months. Tonight, before going to sleep, put a container of cottage cheese in the refrigerator with a piece of fruit beside it. That simple gesture is the beginning of a new cycle for your muscle. Change doesn't begin at the gym, it begins with your next choice. Tell me in the comments, did you already know about the power of this food for muscles? If this content opened your eyes, imagine what the next videos can do for you. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Take good care of yourself, take good care of those you love.